The chair umpire had to ask the crowd to quiet down. Not once. Several times. In a stadium in Toronto, at a Canadian tournament, on a Wednesday night, the officials could not get through the score because there were too many Filipinos in the building and they would not stop. Flags everywhere. A chant that kept building between points. Eala. 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 And this was not the Philippines. This was Sobeys Stadium, in Canada, at the Canadian Open, where the home favorite Leylah Fernandez had played earlier the same night. The crowd that took over that arena had traveled to be there. Then the match ended. Alex Eala won it in 3 sets. And she walked to the microphone for the on-court interview, and the first thing she did was not talk about her tennis. She looked up at the stands and asked them to wave their flags so she could see them. Then she said 5 words that a whole country has not stopped repeating since. I am eternally grateful. And then she switched languages. She stopped speaking English and started speaking Filipino, on an international broadcast, in a stadium where most people in the seats had no idea what she was saying. Here is what makes all of that strange. The girl, those 5,000 people came to see, left the Philippines when she was 13 years old. She got on a plane by herself and moved 8,000 miles away to an academy in Spain. She spent her teenage years in Mallorca. She learned to compete in a language that was not hers, in a country that was not hers, in a sport her own country had never produced a single top 100 woman in. For most of her life, when Alex Eala walked onto a court, nobody in the stands spoke her language at all. So how does someone who left at 13 end up carrying an entire nation into a stadium in Canada? That is the question, and I want to be honest with you about something before we go further. The answer is not the feel-good version you are expecting. Because 6 months before Toronto, that exact same love almost broke her. There was a night in Manila where all of this went very wrong, and almost nobody outside the Philippines noticed it happen. We have to start with the plane. To understand why a Filipino crowd in Canada lost control of itself, you have to understand what Alex Eala had to do to get there. She had to leave. There is no tennis system in the Philippines. There is no national academy, no development pipeline, no network of coaches feeding talent up through junior circuits into the professional tour. Basketball owns that country. Boxing owns that country. Tennis is a sport you play if your family can pay for it, on courts you have to go looking for. And before Alex Eala, no Filipina had ever been ranked inside the top 100 in the world. Not one, in the entire history of the sport. Think about what that does to a kid who is good at this. There is no poster on the wall. There is no path somebody already walked. There is nobody to call and ask what happens next. So, at 13 years old, she got on a plane to Mallorca and enrolled at the Rafa Nadal Academy. Her parents, Mike and Riza, stayed behind. She did not. 13. A new language. A different hemisphere. A training schedule built for adults. Home stopped being a place she lived and became a place she visited. And here is why that detail lands differently for Filipinos than it does for anyone else watching this. That story is not a tennis story in the Philippines. It is a family story. Millions of Filipino households have a version of it. A mother who went to work in Dubai. A father on a ship for 9 months a year. A sister who took the nursing job in Toronto so somebody younger could stay in school. Leaving is the central act of modern Filipino life, and everyone who does it makes the same bet Eala made at 13, I will go, alone, and I will make it worth it. The Filipinos in that Toronto stadium did not just admire her flight to Mallorca, they took the same flight. Different airport, same reason. So when she started winning, it did not register as sports. It registered as proof. The first time she could actually see the size of what was building, it was New York, US Open 2025. She was ranked number 70 in the world, which means nobody schedules you on the big courts and nobody expects you to survive week 1. Her first round opponent was Clara Towson, seeded 14th. Eala won the first set 6-3, lost the second 2-6, and then played a third set tiebreak that went 13 points to 11, read that again, 13-11. That is a tiebreak that would not end, point after point after point, at the biggest tournament in North America, against a top 15 player, with a 20-year-old from a country that had never won a Grand Slam main draw match holding the racket. She won it. First Filipina in history to win a main draw match at a major. She lost in the second round to Cristina Buxa, and this is the part I want you to hold on to. Afterward, she posted about the week. And she did not write about her level, or her ranking, or what she needed to fix. She wrote that she had never in her life felt so loved on a tennis court. Not proud. Not satisfied. Loved. A 20-year-old professional athlete summarizing the biggest week of her career, and the only thing she measured was how much people cared about her. That is the first real clue in this whole story, and almost nobody picked it up at the time. If you are watching this from somewhere that is not the Philippines, do me a favor before we keep going. Put your city in the comments. Not for the algorithm, and I am not asking you to say anything nice about the channel. I want to see the map. I want to see how many cities are sitting in this comment section, because I have a feeling that map and the crowd in Toronto are the same thing, and I want to know how big it actually is. Now, here is where the story turns. Because 5 months after New York, all of that love followed her home to Manila, and it turned into the heaviest thing she had ever carried. January 2026. Melbourne. Australian Open. Alex Eala walks out for her first ever main draw match at the Australian Open against Alycia Parks, ranked 71st in the world. She wins the opening set 6-love. 6-0. Parks does not win a single game. She loses the match, 3-6, 2-6, gone. From a set that could not have been more perfect to a defeat, in about 90 minutes. Sit with how strange that scoreline is, because I need you to feel the weirdness of it before we go anywhere else. How do you lose a match you just won 6-love? Nobody had a good answer. Not the commentators, not the analysts, and if you read her press conference from that day, not her either. But here is the thing about that trip. Because she lost in the first round, her calendar suddenly opened up. And that opening let her do something she had waited her whole life to do. She flew home. Late January 2026. Manila. The Philippine Women's Open. The first WTA tournament ever held in the Philippines, at the Rizal Memorial Tennis Center, freshly refurbished for the occasion. A WTA 125 event, which is a modest tier by tour standards, and it did not matter even slightly, because it had never happened before. Not once. Not in 100 years of the sport existing. She got a wild card. She flew in with her parents and her coach, Joan Bosch. And when she landed, people in the airport recognized her and started applauding in the terminal. Strangers. At baggage claim. Tickets for the final 2 days sold out before a single ball was struck. She had said publicly that having a tournament at home was a dream, and that she hoped it would make young Filipina girls believe this was possible. Now think about the situation she just created for herself. Every single person in that stadium is there because of her. The tournament arguably exists because of her. The sponsors, the broadcast, the flags, the little girls in the front row holding signs. All of it is pointed at one 20-year-old. First round, she destroyed Elena Charieva 6-1, 6-2. The building went up. And then she lost in the quarterfinals. Camila Osorio, from Colombia. 6-4, 6-4, straight sets, in Manila. In front of the only crowd on earth that had never had anyone else to cheer for. Mini question, and I want you to actually think about it, how do you play tennis in front of a crowd like that? Because a normal crowd wants you to win. That crowd needed her to win. There is a difference, and it is not small. A normal home crowd goes home a little disappointed. That crowd had waited 100 years. Now look at what was happening underneath the results, because a pattern was forming and it was ugly. Melbourne, days earlier. She wins the first set 6-love, then loses. Manila. She is level in both sets against Osorio, gets to 4-4, 6-4, 6-4, and cannot close either one. Go back further. Look at the list of people who had beaten her by then. Jessica Pegula, Leylah Fernandez, Zheng Qinwen, Iga Swiatek, Maya Joint, Renata Zarazua. Some of those are losses anybody would take. Swiatek, Zheng, Pegula, those are the best players alive. But Maya Joint and Renata Zarazua are not names that end careers, and those are the ones that get inside a player and stay there. The pattern was always the same shape. Alex Eala could build something, she could not always hold it. And in tennis, that is the hardest problem there is, because you cannot practice it. You can practice a serve. You can practice a return. You cannot practice the specific feeling of being one set up with a country watching, because there is no drill for a country. So here is the second mini question, and this one is uncomfortable, and I want you to sit in it with me for a second. What if the love was the problem? That was the read that started circulating. Not loudly, not cruelly, but it was there. She is 20 years old. She is carrying 110 million people onto every court she walks onto. Nobody in the history of Philippine tennis has done this, so she has nobody to ask how. She has never had a single match, anywhere, where she could just be a tennis player having a normal Tuesday. And every time the crowd got bigger, the closing got harder. New York, 70 in the world, adored, out in the second round. Melbourne, 6-love, collapse. Manila, home, sold out, quarterfinals. The evidence pointed one direction and it pointed there hard. The thing that made Alex Eala special was also the thing crushing her. There is a version of this story that ends right there, and honestly, it is the most common version in sports. A talented kid from a country with no infrastructure becomes a symbol before she becomes a champion, and the symbol eats the player. It happens constantly. It is the default outcome. So, by February 2026, this was the honest reading. 20 years old. A junior Grand Slam title, one enormous Miami run in 2025 where she reached the semifinals of a WTA 1000, and then a growing stack of matches where she led and could not finish. A nation that loved her so much it had become a physical presence on the court with her. The question was never whether Filipinos loved Alex Eala. The question was whether that love was going to cost her the career it was built on. And 6 months later, in Washington, she answered it in a way nobody predicted. Everyone got this backwards. Including me, we all assumed the weight was the problem. 110 million people on a 20-year-old back. Too much, too young, nobody to share it with. It is the standard narrative and it fit the evidence perfectly. So look at the timing. Washington, D.C. First week of August 2026. The Mubadala DC Open, a WTA 500 event, hard courts, brutal summer humidity. Eala arrives with 0 WTA titles. Round by round it becomes ridiculous. She beats Naomi Osaka. 4-time Grand Slam champion, former world number 1. 6-4, 6-2. 2 sets, no drama, no survival act, just a professional taking apart someone who used to own the sport. She beats Alina Svitolina, a former world number 3 who has spent a decade turning promising young players into cautionary tales. And then the final, Jessica Pegula, world number 3, top seed of the tournament. And one of the 6 names on that list, a player who had already beaten Eala before. Then a thunderstorm hit Washington and the final had to be split across 2 days. She had to walk off in the middle of the biggest match of her life, sleep on it, and come back the next day with the trophy still sitting there, unclaimed and no rhythm to fall back on. She finished it. 3 top seeds in 1 week. First WTA singles title. Now, here is the part almost nobody connected. Washington was not just the best tennis week of her life. It was the biggest Filipino crowd of her life. The DC area has a huge Filipino community, and they showed up in numbers that a WTA 500 event has never seen for a player ranked outside the top 30. Flags in the stands all week. Noise on every point. She was playing in America and it sounded like a home tournament. Read those 2 facts next to each other again. The loudest Filipino crowd she had ever played in front of, and the best week she had ever played. That is not a coincidence you can hand wave away, because the pattern we built in the last 10 minutes predicted the exact opposite. If the love was the weight, Washington should have been another Manila. Bigger crowd. Bigger expectation. Another collapse in the round that mattered. Instead, she beat 3 top seeds and won a final that got interrupted by a storm. So the assumption was wrong. And I think it was wrong in a very specific way. Everyone kept said she was carrying the crowd. Picture that. A player hunched under the weight of 110 million people, dragging them up the mountain with her. That was never what was happening. She was not carrying them. She was standing on them. The crowd was not luggage. It was altitude. Every match she played in front of Filipinos, she started higher up the mountain than her opponent did, because there is a level of belief you cannot manufacture inside your own head, and can only receive from outside it. Osaka had a better record. Pegula had a better ranking. Neither of them had 4,000 people who had rearranged their week to be in that building. And if you have ever been inside a crowd like that, you already know what I am describing, because you have felt it move in both directions. So tell me if you think I am reading this right. Drop it in the comments, agree or disagree, because I have seen a lot of people explain that Washington run as a hot streak and I do not think it was a streak at all. Here is the other piece of evidence, and it is a small one that says everything. After she won the biggest title of her life, listen to what she talked about. Not her forehand. Not her ranking, which had just jumped to a career high of 20 in the world. Not the tactical adjustment she made against Pegula. She talked about the people who came. Go all the way back to New York, 11 months earlier, ranked 70, out in the second round, and what did she say? That she had never felt so loved on a tennis court. Same sentence. Different city. 11 months apart. Whether she is losing in round 2 or lifting a trophy, Alex Eala measures her weeks by how much love was in the building. That is not a media-trained athlete saying the nice thing. That is a person telling you, repeatedly, over a year, exactly where her fuel comes from. While everybody around her insisted that fuel was a burden, she left Washington with a trophy and a world ranking of 20. 4 days later, she walked into Toronto. And she was about to find out exactly how far that crowd was willing to travel to reach her. 30 minutes. That is how long the tickets lasted. Every seat for that session in Toronto, gone in half an hour. The Canadian Open had scheduled her on the grandstand. 2,800 seats. Tournament director Carl Hale went on Tennis Channel and did the math out loud. The grandstand holds 2,800 and Eala had probably sold upwards of 5,000 tickets. So, they moved her off the second court, onto center court, the main stadium. A 25th seed, first appearance at the tournament as a seeded player, promoted to the biggest stage on the grounds because the building was not big enough. And Leylah Fernandez, a Canadian, in Canada, was on the same night session. Hale credited the surge to Eala. Now look at who was waiting on the other side of the net. Alycia Parks. Of every player in that draw, tennis handed her the exact opponent from Melbourne. The one who had taken a 6-love opening set and won anyway, the living proof of everything she had not been able to fix. And then the match went and repeated itself, beat for beat. First set, Eala, 6-1. Total control, same as Melbourne. Second set, Parks fights back and takes it, 6-4. Third set. 2 games all. Dead level. Packed stadium. Same opponent, same script, same moment where every previous version of Alex Eala had let it slip. She won the last 4 games. 6-2. 1 hour and 51 minutes. She closed it out holding serve to love, not conceding a single point in the final game of the match. She did not just beat Parks. She went back and rewrote the tape. And the whole time, the noise was so constant that the chair umpire had to keep asking the crowd to settle down. Officials at professional tennis matches do not do that casually. There were so many Filipinos in that stadium, chanting her name between points, that the match could not be run normally. Then it ended, and we get to the moment this entire video is about. She takes the microphone for the on-court interview. First thing she does, before a single word about the tennis, she asks the crowd to wave their flags so she can see them. She tells them there are so many Filipinos in the building tonight. So many flags. And then, I am eternally grateful. She says she just came off Washington, so this feels like a celebration. Not a match. A celebration. And then she switches into Filipino. She tells her kababayan that she sees them week after week, supporting her. And that week after week, she also sees how much they love their fellow Filipinos. And that this is what makes her so proud to be Filipino herself. Then, she thanks everyone who supports tennis and creates atmospheres like this. And she says something that most people scrolled past. She says experiencing this is the pleasure of her life. Not winning. Experiencing this. Now here is the detail I have been saving, and I have not seen a single channel talk about it. She said the most important part in Filipino, think about where she was standing. Toronto. Canada. An international broadcast going out to dozens of countries. A stadium where the majority of people, including the interviewer standing next to her, did not understand a word of it. She could have said all of it in English. Her English is perfect. She has done 100 press conferences in English. Every incentive in professional sports pushes an athlete to speak the language of the broadcast, because that is how you get clipped, quoted, and marketed. She did not translate herself. She stood in the middle of a WTA 1000 stadium and spoke directly to 5,000 people over the heads of everyone else, and let the rest of the world listen in without subtitles. She did not make her gratitude legible to the tour. She made it legible to them. That is not an accident. That is a choice about who the message belonged to. And when you put that next to what she said in New York 11 months earlier, that she had never felt so loved on a tennis court, you can see the same thread running through both. This is a player who keeps trying to give something back and keeps running out of ways to do it in a language that fits. Here is what I think she actually meant. Alex Eala did not bring the Philippines to Toronto. The Philippines was already in Toronto. It has been in Toronto for decades. Filipino nurses, Filipino caregivers, Filipino families who arrived in the 70s and the 90s and last year, spread across a city, spread across a continent, mostly invisible to the sports world. What she gave those people was not representation, it was a reason to all stand up at the same time. That is the thing about a diaspora. You can have millions of people who share everything and still never share a room. There is no stadium for being Filipino in Canada. There is no schedule. And then a 21-year-old walks onto a tennis court on a Wednesday night, and suddenly there is a time, a place, and a reason, and 5,000 people find each other. So when she says she is eternally grateful, listen to which direction that gratitude runs. Because it runs both ways. She is thanking them for showing up. They are thanking her for finally giving them somewhere to show up to. And notice what she actually said in Filipino. She did not say she was proud of herself. She said that watching Filipinos support each other, week after week, is what makes her proud to be Filipino. She turned the compliment around and handed it back to the crowd. The champion stood in the middle of a WTA 1000 stadium and told the people in the seats that they were the impressive part. That is why that clip will not stop circulating. It is not a sports highlight. It is a group of people who have spent their whole lives being told they are a workforce, hearing someone say, out loud, in their language, on international television, that they are a country. She is 21 years old. She has one WTA title, a career high ranking of 20 in the world, and the US Open is 3 weeks away. In New York, a city with one of the largest Filipino populations in the United States, 5,000 of them found their way to a stadium in Toronto on a few days' notice. So I want to know what Flushing Meadows is going to look like, and I do not think anyone is ready for the answer, including the US Open. I am covering every single round she plays there, from the draw to whenever it ends. Subscribe now so you are actually in the room when it happens, because if Toronto was the rehearsal, New York is the show. And tell me in the comments, how many flags do you think we see in New York? I have a number in my head. I think it is too low.